vlogs that I've done recently, I've suggested that there's something special about this hive. Now, the hive itself, as you can see, is nothing unusual. It's a very standard polystyrene nuke hive. The hive next to it is a very standard national beehive, which is empty, and sometime this spring the bees are going to be moved from there into there. Now, if I take the top off, you should be able to see some bees down there, and they look quite ordinary. They're not ordinary because the queen is not ordinary. The queen in here is a special type of queen, quite a rare type of queen, and this blog is going to be about why she's special and where she's come from. The ancestors to bees were wasps, and wasps are and were carnivores, but some of them decided they quite liked this nectar stuff that they were finding about. So some of the wasps evolved into nectar eaters rather than being carnivores, and over time these bees evolved into a huge range of different types of bee, one of which was the honeybee. Now, these bees continued to evolve, and there were, I think, somewhere 7 or 8 different types of honeybee. And you can see from this map that along northern Europe, the most common type of honeybee is the Apis mellifera. Now, again, these bees continue to evolve to fit their environments. And then our ancestors finished digging out the English Channel as our first move towards Brexit, which meant that our country became like a Jurassic Park almost, where the Apis mellifera were isolated from all the other bees in Europe. So they started to develop to fit the environment they were in. So as a result of this, they became very weather resistant. They could tolerate our horrible winters. They were frugal with the amount of honey that they consumed. They swarmed very little. Although they were a bit frisky by all accounts and a bit spiky, but they had developed to fit our environment. So all was well until about 1940 something, when a disease called the Isle of Wight disease hit us, and by an amazing coincidence it started on the Isle of Wight. What's the chances of that happening, eh? It actually came in from France, obviously. And this disease wiped out the indigenous honeybee species. And there are different theories as to why this might have happened. It was just at the end of the Second World War, and it was thought that maybe the bees weren't being looked after properly. Beekeepers were abroad, and also sugar was difficult to find. But generally it was considered that the English black bee, British black bee, had been wiped out. Now, the Isle of Wight disease actually is a mite infestation, and the mite is known as acarine. Acarine still exists, it's still about, but really nothing much of a problem. I've never had, don't know anybody who has bees that has acarine, which perhaps supports the idea that the bees were very weak at the time, because nowadays the only colonies that do suffer from acarine are weak ones. Anyway, the British black bee was sort of wiped out, or at least that was the general opinion of things. To replace them, we imported bees from abroad, particularly Italy. However, there are a few places in this country, apparently, where the British black bee has actually survived, albeit in very small areas. They are perhaps inevitably in fairly remote areas, I know there's somebody who sells these things in Ireland. There's a bloke in Wales who does them, but they are very rare. And there have been campaigns to try and reintroduce them. I think Anglesey banned non-British black bees, and there are 2 islands up in Scotland that passed a bylaw making it illegal for any bees other than the British black bee to be put on the islands to protect the British bees that are already there. So these black bees actually do exist, and you can buy them, and I bought one. It might seem strange to be able to buy a single bee, but there are a lot of companies who do it, and locally you may find beekeepers who are breeding queens for their own use, for their own apiaries, who may have some to spare. Now, there are a number of companies who sell these things, and they will sell a variety of different types of honeybee. Mostly things like carniolans, linguistas, and buckfast bees come a lot from Denmark these days. The British black queen, however, isn't quite so common, and I think it's only about 3 or 4 that I found companies who do it. Now, a conventional queen would cost maybe £30, something like that. Victoria costs £50. Now, you order these things over the internet, and they arrive a couple of days later in a jiffy bag. And the bags have got all sorts of sort of warning stickers on them, which slightly alarmed my postman Paul when they first started arriving. But over the years he's got used to them now, and it's just a question of, mine, I've got some more bees for you, and he's very relaxed by it all. Now, inside the jiffy bag is a little cassette that the queen is in, and they're often this type, little yellow plastic thing. And this is how they work. This is the cassette with the queen in. It has holes on the top here for ventilation, and although it's very difficult to see, she's in there, and there are about 6 or so what are called retinue bees, and the queen always has some bees whose job it is to look after her. And they clean it and feed her, answer her emails, update Facebook, all the sort of essential things that a queen has to do. So she's in there. She'll be okay for a couple of days, although she arrived today and I want to get them in as quickly as we can. Anyway, there she is. She's okay in there for a couple of days. At the bottom of the thing, here, again it's difficult to make out, in the middle, in the middle there's a little mark out, and when we put her in, I will prise that off. Underneath it is a little block of fondant icing, which is food for her to keep her happy for a couple of days, and gradually she will eat her way through it, as will the other bees in there, and hopefully the bees in the hive that we're going to put together will eat it as well. Now, what we will do is we will suspend this cassette in the hive and leave it for a couple of days, because if we put her in straight away, the bees in the hive already would kill her, because they wouldn't recognise her smell. So they've got to go through a sort of a get to know you period of time, which is normally a couple of days, where they can smell her through the grill, gradually get used to her smell. They will realise that there's no queen, so they'll be quite keen for her to get out, and the probability is in a couple of days when we come back they will have eaten their way through the fondant and she will be gone anyway. And I'm going to put the queen in here because it's a bit late in the year and I'm not sure she will be able to fill up a full brood box. So she's going to go into here. This is about half the size of an ordinary brood box. And the advantage of it is that it's polystyrene, which is it's good for insulation, and hopefully it will help the colony get through the winter. However, there's nothing in here, so I've got to build up some frames that the queen's going to need to get her started. And the first thing I need to find is some frames that have what's called closed and open brood on there. Now, she has been mated apparently, and so hopefully after a couple of days settling in she will start laying eggs, and those eggs will develop into larvae and pupae and then become adult bees. But this process needs certain things which young bees can provide, which is in particular the royal jelly, which is what all of the new bees get to start themselves off with, and that's produced by bees that are only a few days old. So while she's getting herself sorted out, I need some bees in there that are developing, that will hatch and then be available to produce this royal jelly, which is what they need for the eggs and larvae that the new queen's going to produce. So I'm going to go and ferret around the hives around here and find a couple of frames that have got that. As well as that, I'm going to get some frames. I've just got some flying bees in there which will have nectar in the frame, which will act as a food source for the bees, again while they're sorting themselves out. And so I need to go around the hives here and find a couple of those, bring them back, and we'll put the queen in. Okay, I've made the new cup as best I can, and I'll show you what's in there. This side, but it's just an empty frame. That's for them to play with. Nothing on there. This one, oh, sorry guys, has got stores, honey. Oops, big block of it about to fall off there. But can you see the honey there? Just let it move the camera very slightly. Yep. So there's something for them to feed on. Put that in. What have we got in here? This stuff in the middle here is brood, and this is honey around the outside. So they've got some little ones on the way. The worry I have obviously is I put the old queen in here, which would not be a good idea. So there's some brood there, and there's some brood on this one as well. Yep. And some on the other side as well, I think. Yep. So there we are. And there's some food in the last one. So what I've got to do now is take the cassette, this thing I showed you earlier. You can't, but I can. I can see her in there. Just hold up, see if she waves for you. No. Okay, first thing here is to take this off. Take the little plastic cap off, and you can see the white fondant inside there. So what I'll do is I'll put a nail through this like this, and then suspend it in the hive for them to get used to it. Let's close it up a little bit. What I'll put on top of that is this thing, rather grubby thing called a feeder. Oops. Again, let's just move the camera very slightly. And the idea behind this sits on top of the hive like this. There's a groove here, and the bees can come up through here and over the top. Now these here are reservoirs where I can put syrup in. However, they have a habit of drowning themselves quite easily. So you put this plastic arch over the top so they can get up through the groove down to the honey, syrup rather, and drink it without
hopefully drowning themselves. So next thing to do is to fill this up with syrup. So we have syrup. This is just sugar and water, and this is the sort of summer mix, if you like, which is 1 pint of water to 1 pound of sugar. Everything's slightly on the tilt here, so I'm going to put it in the back one so it'll run down, and in it goes. 3 pints. Thank you very much. So we'll see what they make of that. Now we need to leave it for just a couple of days, and then I'll come back to check to see whether the queen has got out of the cage, and also maybe check the
this is just a question of checking to see whether the queen has worked her way out of that little yellow cage that she arrived in. If not, we will open it up for her. So let's just see what's going on. This is the feeder, which is empty. There are the bees, and I'll just change the camera very slightly. Can you see? There's the yellow cage there in the middle with the nail holding it in. I've given a little puff of smoke, so there's all bees down this side, that side, so all looks okay. And excuse me girls, let's see what we've got. And what we've got is nothing. Let's just get her off. Can you see there? That was the little blob of fondant that they've obviously eaten their way through, so she's in there somewhere. Now, am I going to bother looking for her? No. Hopefully she will start laying fairly soon. So it's going to be a week or two before there are eggs and larvae and that sort of thing. So for the time being, we're going to leave it at that, and then we'll come back in a fortnight and see how she's getting on. I did go back a couple of weeks later just to see how she was getting on, and although it wasn't the greatest brood patterns I've ever seen, it was okay, so she seemed to be doing alright. You'll have to take my word for that, I'm afraid, as my camera had a fairly spectacular failure. Now I know she's settled in. She's just left in there now until the spring, and hopefully she survives the winter. And then in the spring, once she's started laying again, I'm going to move her into a full-sized hive, and so then the colony can continue. And there is a possibility I might try to breed some queens from her in the spring, but we'll see how that goes. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a bit.